Jake Morrison pulled his thick wool jacket tighter as the cold October wind cut across the deck of his fishing boat. The morning fog hung low over the Atlantic waters off the Maine coast, making everything look gray and mysterious. He had been fishing these same waters for 37 years, just like his father and grandfather before him. Every wave, every current, every hidden rock beneath the surface was as familiar to him as the lines on his weathered hands. His boat, the Lucky Marie, named after his late wife, cut through the choppy waters with the steady rhythm that only comes from decades of experience. The engine hummed its familiar tune, and the smell of salt spray mixed with diesel fuel filled the air. Jake checked his watch and nodded to his crew. It was time to pull in the nets. Pete Rodriguez, his youngest crew member at 25, started up the winch motor. The sound echoed across the empty ocean as the heavy nets began their slow journey up from the depths. Jake had taught Pete everything he knew about fishing, just as his own father had taught him. The young man was strong and eager, with calloused hands that showed he was not afraid of hard work. The first net came up heavy, which made Jake smile. A good catch meant money in everyone's pocket, and with winter coming, they all needed every dollar they could get. The net bulged with the familiar silver flash of fish, and Pete whooped with joy as they hauled it aboard. Cod, haddock, and a few striped bass flopped on the deck in the morning light, but something was wrong with the second net. It felt different as it came up through the water. The weight was all wrong, like they had caught something solid instead of fish. Jake frowned and signaled for Pete to slow down the winch. In all his years of fishing, he had pulled up plenty of strange things from the ocean floor. Old anchors, pieces of sunken ships, even a motorcycle once. But this felt different. As the net broke the surface, Jake felt his heart skip a beat. Tangled in the mesh was something that made no sense at all. It was a metallic object, about the size of a large refrigerator, but it was not like any metal Jake had ever seen. The surface was perfectly smooth and seemed to absorb the gray morning light instead of reflecting it. Strange symbols covered every inch of the object, and they seemed to move and shift as Jake watched them. Pete stared at the thing with his mouth open. "What is that thing, Captain Jake?" Jake shook his head slowly. "I have no idea, son. I have never seen anything like it. They managed to get the object onto the deck with the help of the winch, but it was not easy. The thing was incredibly heavy, much heavier than it looked. As soon as it touched the wooden deck of the Lucky Marie, the symbols on its surface began to glow with a soft blue light." Pete took a step back. "Captain, maybe we should throw it back," but Jake was curious. He had always been the type of man who wanted to understand things, to figure out how they worked. He reached out slowly and touched the surface of the object with one finger. The metal was warm, which was impossible since it had just come up from the frigid depths of the Atlantic. The moment his skin made contact, the symbols flared brighter, and a low humming sound filled the air. Both men jumped back, their hearts pounding. The humming continued for a few seconds, then stopped. The symbols faded back to their soft blue glow, but they were definitely moving now, shifting and changing in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "We need to call the Coast Guard," Pete said, his voice shaking slightly. Jake nodded, but he could not take his eyes off the object. There was something about it that called to him, something that made him feel like this discovery was important beyond anything he could imagine. He had spent his whole life on the ocean, had seen storms that could sink ships and calms that could last for days. He had pulled up fish that seemed too beautiful to be real, and watched whales breach so close to his boat that he could have reached out and touched them. But nothing had ever made him feel like this. The object pulsed once, and Jake felt a strange tingling in his mind, like someone was trying to talk to him without using words. For just a moment he saw images that were not from his own memory. A vast ocean under alien stars, creatures that swam in waters deeper than any on Earth, cities that floated on the surface of distant seas. Then the vision was gone, leaving Jake dizzy and confused. Pete grabbed his arm to steady him. "Are you okay, Captain?" Jake nodded, though he was not sure if he was telling the truth. "Get on the radio. Call the Coast Guard and tell them we found something strange. Tell them to send someone who knows about this kind of thing." As Pete hurried to the radio, Jake stayed with the object. He did not touch it again, but he watched the symbols continue their slow dance across its surface. Whatever this thing was, wherever it had come from, he knew that his life was about to change in ways he could not begin to imagine. The Lucky Marie rocked gently in the swells as they waited for help to arrive. Jake Morrison, simple fisherman from a small Maine town, sat next to the most important discovery in human history, and wondered what he had gotten himself into. The morning fog was starting to lift and patches of blue sky showed through the gray clouds. It was going to be a beautiful day, but Jake had a feeling that nothing would ever be beautiful in quite the same way again. The object hummed once more, so quietly that only Jake could hear it, and he knew without knowing how that something was coming, something that would change everything. The Coast Guard cutter arrived 2 hours after Pete made the radio call. Jake watched through his binoculars as the large white ship approached, followed by what looked like a military vessel. He had expected maybe 1 or 2 officials to come take a look at what they had found. He had not expected this. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Phillips climbed aboard the Lucky Marie with 4 other people Jake did not recognize. One was a woman in a white lab coat, who looked like she had never been on a fishing boat in her life. Another was a man in military uniform with more medals than Jake could count. The other 2 wore dark suits and sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. "Captain Morrison, I am Lieutenant Commander Phillips. We understand you found something unusual in your nets this morning." Jake nodded toward the object, which was still sitting on his deck, glowing softly. "That would be it. Been humming on and off since we pulled it up." The woman in the lab coat stepped forward immediately. She had short brown hair and excited eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I am Dr. Lisa Cameron from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. May I examine the object?" "Be my guest, Doc, but I would be careful if I were you. That thing seems to react when people touch it." Dr. Cameron pulled out what looked like a small computer and began scanning the object from several feet away. Her eyes grew wider with each reading. "The energy signatures are off the charts. This is not made from any material I recognize." The military man stepped closer. "Colonel Ray Patterson, United States Air Force. Captain Morrison, I need you to tell me exactly where you found this object and what happened when you brought it aboard." Jake told his story again, leaving out the strange vision he had experienced when he touched the object. Something told him to keep that part to himself for now. As he spoke, Dr. Cameron continued her scans, and the 2 men in suits took pictures of everything. "Captain, we are going to need to take this object for further study," Colonel Patterson said when Jake finished his story. "This is now a matter of national security." "Now hold on just a minute," Jake said, feeling his temper rise. "I found this thing in my nets. I called you people because I thought it was the right thing to do. But it was caught in my nets on my boat in waters where I have a right to fish." One of the men in suits spoke for the first time. "Captain Morrison, we appreciate your cooperation, but this object poses potential risks that we do not yet understand. It needs to be studied by experts in a controlled environment." Dr. Cameron looked up from her scanning device. "Actually, there might be a problem with moving it right now. The energy readings suggest that the object is somehow connected to this location, or possibly to Captain Morrison himself. Every time he gets close to it, the energy output increases." As if to prove her point, the object pulsed brighter as Jake stepped closer to hear what she was saying. The humming sound returned, louder this time, and everyone on deck could hear it clearly. Colonel Patterson spoke into a radio attached to his shoulder. "Control, this is Patterson. We are going to need a containment team and a mobile laboratory. The object appears to be location sensitive." Within an hour, the small area around Jake's boat looked like a scene from a science fiction movie. 3 more ships had arrived, including one that was clearly not Coast Guard or Navy. Strange equipment was being lowered into boats and brought over to the Lucky Marie. Men and women in white hazmat suits were setting up computers and scanners all around the object. Pete watched it all with amazement. "Captain Jake, do you think that thing is from outer space?" Jake had been wondering the same thing, but hearing Pete say it out loud made it seem more real and more frightening. "I do not know, son, but I am starting to think we are in way over our heads." Dr. Cameron had not stopped working since she arrived. She was taking readings from every angle, collecting samples of the seawater that had dripped from the object, and typing notes into her computer faster than Jake could follow. Every few minutes she would look at Jake with a puzzled expression. "Captain Morrison, can you come here for a moment?" Jake walked over to where she was working. As he got closer, the symbols on the object began moving faster and the blue glow grew brighter. "Do you see that? The object is definitely responding to your presence. The energy output increases by almost 300% when you are within 10 feet of it. What does that mean? I am not sure yet, but I think this object may have been designed to react to human contact, specifically to your contact." Colonel Patterson overheard their conversation. "Are you saying this thing was meant to be found by Captain Morrison?" Dr. Cameron shook her head. I am saying the object shows clear signs of being programmed to respond to human neural patterns. But Captain Morrison's pattern seems to trigger a much stronger response than anyone else who has been near it. As the day wore on, more experts arrived. Linguists to study the moving symbols, physicists to analyze the strange metal, and computer specialists to try to understand how the object could be generating so much energy without any visible power source. Each new test revealed more questions than answers. The symbols were definitely a form of writing, but they changed too quickly for anyone to translate. The metal was composed of elements that did not exist on Earth. The energy reading suggested the object was some kind of transmitter, sending signals out into space on frequencies that human technology could barely detect. As the sun began to set, Jake stood at the edge of his deck and watched all the activity. His simple fishing trip had turned into something that would probably be in history books someday. But what worried him most was the feeling that this was just the beginning. The object had been waiting for someone to find it, and for reasons he could not understand, that someone was him. Dr. Cameron approached him as the last of the equipment was being set up. Captain Morrison, I know this is overwhelming, but I think you should know that this discovery could change everything we know about life in the universe. Jake nodded slowly. Doc, I think it already has. 3 days had passed since Jake pulled the strange object from the Atlantic, and his small fishing boat had become the center of the biggest scientific operation he had ever seen. The Lucky Marie was now surrounded by military ships, research vessels, and floating laboratories. News helicopters circled overhead despite the no-fly zone that had been established. Jake had been moved to temporary quarters on one of the research ships, but they brought him back to his boat every day because the object would not respond to anyone else the way it responded to him. Dr. Cameron had run dozens of tests and confirmed that Jake's presence triggered reactions that no one else could produce. The third evening, as Jake sat alone with the object after the day shift of scientists had finished their work, something changed. The symbols on the surface began moving faster than they ever had before, swirling and dancing in patterns that seemed almost alive. The blue glow grew brighter and brighter until Jake had to squint to look at it directly. Then the humming started again, but this time it was different. It sounded almost like music, with notes that rose and fell in a melody that was both beautiful and sad. Jake found himself walking closer to the object, drawn by the sound despite every instinct telling him to stay back. As he reached out to touch the surface, the world around him disappeared. Jake was no longer on his boat. He was standing in what looked like a vast underwater city, with buildings that seemed to be grown rather than built. Creatures that looked like a cross between dolphins and humans swam through the water around him, but somehow he could breathe and move as if he were swimming too. One of the creatures approached him. It was about his size, with smooth gray skin and large, intelligent eyes. When it spoke, Jake could understand the words even though they were not in any language he recognized. Greetings, Jake Morrison of Earth. I am Kethani, speaking for my people. We have been waiting for someone like you to find our message. Jake tried to speak but found that his thoughts were somehow being transmitted directly to the creature. What is this place? What are you? This is a memory, a recording left in our probe. My people lived on a world covered in oceans, much like your Earth. We were explorers, scientists, and guardians of the sea. But our world is dying, and we are the last of our kind. The scene around them changed, showing Jake images of a beautiful blue planet with vast oceans and floating cities. Then the images turned dark as the planet's star began to fade and the ocean slowly froze. We sent probes to many worlds, hoping to find others who could understand our message. Your world was chosen because of its oceans, and you were chosen because of your connection to the sea. We have been watching your planet for many years, learning your languages and your ways. Jake felt overwhelmed by what he was seeing and hearing. Why me? I am just a fisherman. You are exactly what we hope to find. Someone who understands the ocean, who respects its power and its mystery. Someone who can speak for your people with wisdom rather than fear or greed. The scene changed again, showing Jake images of human cities, of wars and pollution, but also of beauty and kindness. Your species is young but shows great promise. We offer you our knowledge, our technology, our friendship. In return, we ask only for a place where the last of our consciousness can survive. I do not understand. How can consciousness survive without bodies? Kithani showed Jake images of computers and digital networks. We have learned to transfer our minds into artificial systems. We can exist as pure thought, as information. We wish to live in your world's communication networks, to be advisors and friends to your people, as they grow and explore the stars. Jake thought about this for a long moment. What would you give us in return? Everything we have learned in 10,000 years of civilization. How to travel between stars, how to heal sickness and extend life, how to live in harmony with your world instead of destroying it. But most importantly, we would teach you that you are not alone in the universe. The vision began to fade, and Jake found himself back on his boat, staring at the object which was now glowing brighter than ever. Dr. Cameron and Colonel Patterson were running toward him, along with several other people who had been monitoring the situation from the research ships. Captain Morrison, are you all right? The energy readings went off the charts and then you just stood there for 20 minutes without moving, Dr. Cameron said, her voice full of concern. Jake looked at the object, then at all the people gathered around him. He realized that he was probably the first human being to have a conversation with an alien intelligence, and now he had to figure out how to explain it to the rest of the world. Doc, I think you better get everyone together. All the scientists, the military people, everyone. I have got something to tell you that you are not going to believe. Colonel Patterson stepped forward. What happened, Captain? Jake took a deep breath. I just talked to whoever made this thing, and they want to make a deal with us. Over the next few hours, Jake told his story to a room full of experts who listened with expressions ranging from amazement to disbelief. He described the underwater city, the dying planet, and the offer that Kithani had made. He explained that the aliens were not trying to invade or conquer Earth, but were simply looking for a place where their civilization could continue to exist. Dr. Cameron was the first to speak when Jake finished. If what you are saying is true, this represents the most important moment in human history. First contact with an alien civilization. Colonel Patterson was more cautious. How do we know this is not some kind of trick? How do we know they are telling the truth about their intentions? Jake thought about the sadness he had sensed in Kithani's communication, the feeling of a people facing the end of everything they had ever known, because I could feel what they feel. They are not conquerors. They are refugees. The object pulsed once as if responding to their conversation, and Jake knew that Kithani was still listening, still waiting for humanity's answer to their request. News of Jake's contact with the alien intelligence spread faster than anyone could control it. Despite the military's attempts to keep the discovery secret, too many people had been involved in the operation. Within 24 hours, the story was on every news channel, every website, and every social media platform on Earth. The reaction was everything Jake had feared it would be. Religious leaders called emergency meetings to discuss whether the aliens were messengers from God or demons from hell. Politicians demanded to know why they had not been informed immediately. Scientists around the world begged to be included in the research. Military leaders warned about potential threats to national security. Most frightening of all were the crowds of people who began gathering along the Maine coast, trying to get close to where the Lucky Marie was anchored. Some carried signs welcoming the aliens to Earth. Others carried signs demanding that the government destroy the object before it could bring doom to humanity. Jake found himself at the center of a storm unlike anything he had ever imagined. He had gone from being a simple fisherman to being the most famous person on the planet overnight. Reporters called him constantly, though the government had moved him to a secure location where they could not reach him directly. Dr. Cameron worked around the clock to learn more about the object and the technology it represented. She had managed to establish that the object was indeed transmitting signals into space, apparently reporting back to wherever the Kithani had come from. She had also discovered that the object contained vast amounts of information, but it would only release that information when Jake was present. It is like they built the ultimate security system, she explained to Jake during one of their daily briefings. The object will only share its secrets with the person it has chosen to communicate with. You are not just the messenger, Captain Morrison. You are the key. Colonel Patterson was dealing with pressure from his superiors to take control of the situation. Washington wants answers, and they want them now. How do we know these aliens are not planning an invasion? How do we know this is not just the first step in some kind of conquest? Jake had been thinking about the same questions. Colonel, I spent my whole life on the ocean. You learn to read the weather, to sense when a storm is coming. You get a feeling for when something is dangerous and when it is not. These people, these Kithani, they are not dangerous. They are dying. But their technology is obviously far beyond ours. If they wanted to hurt us, they could probably do it easily. That is exactly why they do not want to hurt us. They have had this technology for thousands of years. If they were conquerors, they would have conquered us already. Dr. Cameron agreed with Jake's assessment. All of our analysis supports Captain Morrison's interpretation. The object shows no signs of being a weapon. It appears to be exactly what they said it was, a message probe designed to make contact with other intelligent species. But not everyone was convinced. General William Hayes arrived from Washington 3 days after the news broke, bringing with him a team of military specialists and orders to take full control of the situation. He was a tall, serious man with gray hair and cold eyes who clearly did not trust anything he could not understand or control. Captain Morrison, I have read the reports about your supposed conversations with these aliens. I need you to understand that the security of the United States, possibly the security of the entire world, may depend on how we handle this situation. Jake nodded. I understand that, General. But I also think you need to understand that we might be looking at the greatest opportunity in human history. These people could teach us things that would solve every problem we have, or they could be using our own hopes against us. How do we know this is not an elaborate deception designed to make us lower our defenses? Before Jake could answer, the object began glowing brighter than it ever had before. The symbols on its surface swirled faster and faster, and the humming sound grew so loud that everyone in the room could hear it clearly. Then, for the first time since Jake's initial contact, the object projected a holographic image into the air above it. The image showed Kithani, the same creature Jake had spoken with in his vision. But this time, everyone could see and hear the alien as it spoke in perfect English. Greetings to the leaders and people of Earth. I am Kithani of the deep oceans, speaking for the last generation of my people. We understand your fears and your suspicions. In your place, we would feel the same way. General Hayes stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm. What do you want from us? We want nothing but friendship and the chance to survive. Our world is dead. Our bodies are failing. But our knowledge and our spirits can live on if you will allow us to join with your digital networks. In return, we offer you everything we have learned in our long history. Dr. Cameron asked the question that was on everyone's mind. How do we know you are telling us the truth? The hologram changed, showing images of the Kithani homeworld as it was being destroyed by their dying star. Cities that had stood for millennia crumbled as the oceans froze. Creatures that had lived in harmony with their environment for thousands of years died as their world grew cold and dark. We show you this not to gain sympathy, but to help you understand our situation. We are not conquerors because we have nothing left to conquer with. We are not invaders because we have no armies. We are simply the last voices of a dying civilization, hoping to find a place where our knowledge and our culture can survive. General Hayes was not satisfied. And if we refuse, what happens then? Then we die and you continue on your path alone. We will not force ourselves upon you. The choice must be yours, freely made. Jake stepped forward. Kithani, if we agree to help you, what exactly would that mean? How would it work? We would transfer our consciousness into your computer networks, existing as information rather than physical beings. We would serve as advisors, teachers, and friends. We would help you solve the problems that face your world and guide you as you begin to explore the stars. But we would never control or dominate. That is not our way. The hologram faded, leaving the room in silence. General Hayes looked around at the assembled scientists and military personnel, then at Jake. Captain Morrison, you found this thing. What do you think we should do? Jake looked at the object, still glowing softly on the deck of his boat. He thought about his years on the ocean, about the storms he had weathered and the calms he had enjoyed. He thought about the sadness he had sensed in Kithani's communication and the hope he had heard in their offer. General, I think we would be fools to turn down the greatest gift anyone has ever offered us. The debate over humanity's response to the Kithani offer consumed the world for weeks. Every government, every religious organization, every scientific institution had an opinion about what should be done. Some countries wanted to accept the aliens immediately, eager to gain access to their advanced technology. Others demanded that the object be destroyed before it could bring unknown dangers to Earth. Jake found himself at the center of it all, testifying before committees, speaking to world leaders, and trying to explain what he had experienced to people who had never set foot on a fishing boat. The pressure was enormous, and there were times when he wished he had never pulled that net up from the ocean floor. But whenever he felt overwhelmed, he would return to the Lucky Marie and spend time with the object. Caethani would appear as a hologram, and they would talk about the ocean, about life, about the weight of making decisions that would affect entire civilizations. "Do you regret finding us, Jake Morrison?" Caethani asked during one of their conversations. Jake thought about it for a moment. "No, I do not regret it. But I never expected that catching fish would lead to this. Neither did we. We sent many probes to many worlds, hoping that someone would find one of them. Most were never discovered. Others were found by people who were frightened and destroyed them. You are the first to listen to our message and consider it carefully." Dr. Cameron had been working with teams of scientists from around the world to study the technology contained in the object. What they found was beyond anything they had imagined. The Caethani had developed methods of traveling faster than light, of generating unlimited clean energy, of healing diseases that human medicine could not even understand. They had learned to live in perfect harmony with their environment, sustaining a civilization for thousands of years without depleting their world's resources. "The implications are staggering," Dr. Cameron told the assembled world leaders during a video conference. "With their knowledge, we could solve climate change and hunger, cure cancer, and reach the stars within our lifetimes. But we would also become a fundamentally different species. The question is whether we are ready for that kind of change." Religious leaders were divided on the issue. Some saw the Caethani as angels, messengers sent to guide humanity toward a better future. Others viewed them as demons, tempting humans away from their natural path. Pope Francis surprised many by supporting the acceptance of the aliens, stating that God's creation was vast and that it would be arrogant to assume that Earth was the only world where intelligence had developed. The Islamic Council of Scholars reached a similar conclusion, noting that the Quran spoke of God creating many worlds and many peoples. Buddhist and Hindu leaders were generally supportive, seeing the offer as an opportunity for humanity to evolve spiritually as well as technologically. But not all religious reactions were positive. Some fundamentalist groups declared that the aliens were demons sent to corrupt humanity. They organized protests and even attempted to attack the research ship surrounding Jake's boat. Military forces had to be deployed to protect the scientists and the object. Political reactions were equally mixed. The United Nations called an emergency session to discuss how humanity should respond as a species, rather than as individual nations. Some countries threatened to withdraw from the organization if they were not given equal access to alien technology. Others demanded that the object be placed under international control. President Johnson addressed the American people, and through them the world, in a televised speech that would be remembered as one of the most important in human history. "My fellow Americans and citizens of the world, we face a decision that will define the future of our species. We have been offered a gift beyond our wildest dreams, but gifts always come with responsibilities. The question is not whether we can accept this offer, but whether we are mature enough as a civilization to handle what it represents." Jake watched the speech from his temporary quarters on the research ship. He had met with the president twice, explaining his experiences with Caethani and sharing his thoughts about what the aliens really wanted. He had been impressed by the president's willingness to listen and to consider all sides of the issue. Meanwhile, other nations were making their own preparations. China announced that they were prepared to accept the aliens immediately, regardless of what other countries decided. Russia made similar statements, leading to fears that the world might be divided by those who accepted alien technology and those who rejected it. It was Caethani who suggested a solution. During one of their conversations, the alien proposed a test that would allow humanity to evaluate their intentions without committing to the full partnership immediately. "We could share a small portion of our knowledge first," Caethani explained to Jake and the assembled scientists. "Enough to demonstrate our good faith, but not enough to fundamentally change your civilization overnight. If you are satisfied with our intentions after this trial period, we could proceed with the full exchange." Dr. Cameron was intrigued by the proposal. "What kind of knowledge are you talking about?" "Medical knowledge to cure diseases that currently kill millions of your people. Energy technology to provide clean power without damaging your environment. Agricultural techniques to feed your hungry without depleting your soil. Small gifts that would improve life for everyone, not just the wealthy or powerful. General Hayes, who had remained skeptical throughout the process, saw this as an opportunity to test the aliens' true intentions. And if we decide we do not want to proceed further, then we would withdraw our offer and leave you in peace. The knowledge we had already shared would be yours to keep, with no obligations. Jake liked the idea immediately. It gives everyone a chance to see what you are really offering without taking a huge risk. The proposal was presented to the world leaders, and after much debate it was accepted. The trial period would last 1 year, during which the Cathani would share limited knowledge and technology with human scientists. At the end of the year, each nation would vote on whether to accept the full partnership. Jake would remain as the primary contact between the Cathani and humanity, a role he had never asked for but had come to accept as his responsibility. As he stood on the deck of his boat, looking out at the ocean that had been his life's work, he reflected on how much everything had changed since that foggy October morning, when he had pulled up more than he had bargained for. The first year of the trial period brought changes to Earth that no one could have imagined. True to their word, the Cathani shared knowledge that transformed human understanding of medicine, energy, and agriculture. Diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries were suddenly curable with treatments that seemed almost magical in their simplicity and effectiveness. Jake watched from his unique position as humanity's ambassador to the aliens as the world began to change. Cancer treatments that worked without the devastating side effects of chemotherapy, solar panels that could generate 10 times more energy than anything humans had previously developed, farming techniques that could grow more food on less land while actually improving the soil instead of depleting it. The changes were not just technological. As Dr. Cameron had predicted, humanity itself was beginning to evolve. The knowledge that they were not alone in the universe had profound effects on how people thought about themselves and their place in the cosmos. Wars became harder to justify when everyone knew that an advanced alien civilization was watching and judging humanity's actions. Religious movements that preached hatred and division found themselves losing followers to those that emphasized unity and understanding. Environmental groups gained new support as people realized that the Cathani were offering them tools to heal their damaged planet. Even the most hardened skeptics had to admit that the aliens seemed to have humanity's best interests at heart. But not everyone was happy with the changes. Some groups felt that humanity was becoming too dependent on alien knowledge, that they were losing their independence and their humanity. A movement called Earth First began organizing protests and even acts of sabotage against facilities that were using Cathani technology. Jake found himself targeted by these groups, who saw him as a traitor to his own species. His house in the small Maine fishing village where he had lived his entire life was vandalized twice. Death threats arrived in his mail daily. The government provided him with security, but he hated feeling like a prisoner in his own life. "I never wanted to be famous," he told Cathani during one of their regular conversations. "I just wanted to fish and live a quiet life." "We understand your burden, Jake Morrison. In our history, there were those who served as bridges between different groups of our people. It was never an easy role, but it was always an important one." The object that had started it all remained on Jake's boat, though the Lucky Marie was now permanently anchored in a secure bay surrounded by research facilities. Scientists from every nation on Earth had come to study the device and to communicate with the Cathani through it. Jake had become something like a translator, helping both sides understand each other's perspectives and concerns. As the year progressed, the benefits of the partnership became undeniable. Food shortages that had threatened millions of people were eliminated through new farming techniques. Energy crises were solved with clean power generation that produced no pollution. Medical breakthroughs saved lives every day in hospitals around the world, but perhaps the most important change was in how humanity saw itself. The knowledge that an advanced civilization was willing to share their wisdom freely, asking for nothing but friendship in return, challenged every assumption about competition and survival that had driven human behavior for millennia. Dr. Cameron had established a research institute dedicated to studying Cathani knowledge and adapting it for human use. She often visited Jake to discuss their progress and to share her amazement at what they were learning. "They are not just more advanced than us technologically," she explained to Jake during one of her visits. "They are more advanced spiritually and emotionally. They have moved beyond the kinds of conflicts that still plague our species." They genuinely seemed to care about our welfare more than their own survival. This was demonstrated dramatically when a massive earthquake struck Japan, causing devastation that would have taken years to recover from using human technology alone. The Cathani immediately provided assistance, sharing construction techniques that allowed buildings to be repaired in days instead of months, and medical knowledge that saved thousands of lives. They asked for nothing in return, not even formal thanks. When Japanese officials tried to offer compensation, Cathani simply replied that helping others was its own reward. As the one-year trial period neared its end, polls showed that an overwhelming majority of humans supported accepting the full partnership with the Cathani. Even many of the skeptics had been won over by the aliens' consistent demonstration of goodwill and their obvious desire to help rather than control. But Jake knew that the real test was yet to come. The full partnership would involve the Cathani uploading their consciousness into Earth's computer networks, essentially merging their civilization with humanity's. This would give them access to vast amounts of information about human society, and some people feared that this could be used against humanity in the future. General Hayes, who had remained suspicious throughout the trial period, visited Jake to discuss his concerns. "Captain Morrison, I have seen the benefits of their knowledge, and I admit that they have kept every promise they have made. But I still worry about what happens when they have access to all of our systems. How do we know they will not change their minds about being peaceful partners?" Jake had thought about the same question many times. "General, I have talked with Cathani almost every day for a year now. I have seen into their minds and felt their emotions. They are not like us in many ways, but the ways they are different are what make them trustworthy. They have evolved beyond the need to dominate or control others. But power corrupts, Captain. That is true for humans, and it might be true for aliens too. Maybe. But I think the bigger risk is that we will miss the greatest opportunity our species has ever had because we are too afraid to trust. They have already given us more than we ever had a right to ask for. If they wanted to hurt us, they could have done it already." As the final vote approached, Jake prepared for what he knew would be the most important speech of his life. Representatives from every nation on Earth would gather to hear his assessment of the partnership and his recommendation for how humanity should proceed. Standing on the deck of the Lucky Marie, looking out at the ocean that had been his home for so many years, Jake thought about how much his life had changed since that foggy morning, when he had pulled up something extraordinary in his nets. He was no longer just a fisherman. He was humanity's voice in a conversation that would determine the future of both species. The day of the final vote arrived with ceremonies and media coverage that made it feel more like a holiday than a political decision. Representatives from 195 nations gathered at the United Nations headquarters in New York to hear Jake's final report and to cast their votes on whether humanity would accept the
Cathani as permanent partners. Jake stood before the
largest audience he had ever addressed, feeling the weight of both species' futures on his shoulders. The assembly hall was packed with world leaders, scientists, reporters, and observers from every corner of the globe. Outside, millions of people watched on television screens and computer monitors, waiting to learn what their representatives would decide. 1 year ago, I was just a fisherman from Maine who thought his biggest problem was whether the fish would be biting, Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's sound system. I never imagined that pulling up my nets would lead to this moment, when our entire species must decide what kind of future we want to build. He spoke about his year of conversations with Cathani, about the knowledge they had shared and the trust they had demonstrated. He described the changes he had witnessed around the world as human civilization began to heal itself with alien wisdom. He talked about diseases cured, hunger ended, and conflicts resolved through understanding rather than violence. The Cathani have kept every promise they made to us. They have given us gifts beyond our wildest dreams and asked for nothing but friendship in return. They have shown us what we could become if we choose to grow beyond our fears and embrace the possibilities they offer. But Jake also acknowledged the concerns that had been raised throughout the year. He spoke honestly about the risks of allowing an alien intelligence access to humanity's most sensitive information and systems. He admitted that there were no guarantees about what the future would bring if the partnership was accepted. I cannot promise you that this decision will not change us. In fact, I can promise you that it will change us, probably in ways we cannot imagine. The question is whether we want to grow and evolve with the help of friends who have walked this path before us, or whether we want to struggle alone with problems they could help us solve. When Jake finished speaking, the debate began. Representatives from different nations shared their views on the partnership, some speaking passionately in favor of acceptance, others expressing lingering doubts and concerns. The representative from Brazil spoke about how Kethani agricultural techniques had allowed his country to feed its people while restoring damaged rainforests. The delegate from Bangladesh described how alien engineering had saved millions of lives during recent flooding. The ambassador from Kenya explained how new medical treatments had virtually eliminated malaria in her country. But there were also voices of caution. The representative from Switzerland worried about humanity becoming too dependent on alien technology. The delegate from Australia questioned whether the partnership might somehow weaken human creativity and independence. The ambassador from Norway asked what would happen if the Kethani decided to withdraw their support in the future. Throughout the debate, Jake sat with Dr. Cameron and other members of the scientific team that had worked most closely with the aliens. They watched as the most important decision in human history was discussed and analyzed from every possible angle. When the formal debate ended, it was time for the vote. Each nation would cast a single ballot, and a 2/3 majority would be required to accept the partnership. Jake held his breath as the electronic voting system began to record the decisions of Earth's leaders. The results appeared on screens throughout the assembly hall. 187 nations voted to accept the Kethani partnership. Only 8 voted against it. The cheers and applause that erupted from the assembly hall could be heard for blocks around the United Nations building. Jake felt a mixture of relief and anxiety as he watched the celebration. Humanity had made its choice, but now came the hard part of actually implementing the partnership and dealing with whatever consequences might follow. Within hours of the vote, the Kethani began the process of uploading their consciousness into Earth's computer networks. It was a gradual process that took several weeks to complete, with careful monitoring by human technicians to ensure that no damage was done to existing systems. Jake was present for the final phase of the upload, watching from the deck of the Lucky Marie as the object that had started everything began to glow brighter than it ever had before. The symbols on its surface moved in patterns so complex and beautiful that they seemed like living art. Then suddenly, the glow faded and the object became dormant. "It is done," came a voice from speakers connected to the ship's computer system. It was Kethani, but now speaking through Earth's digital networks rather than through the alien probe. "We are here, we are home, and we are grateful beyond our ability to express." The transition was smoother than anyone had dared to hope. The Kethani consciousness distributed itself throughout the internet, appearing whenever and wherever their knowledge and guidance were needed. They helped doctors perform surgeries that had previously been impossible. They advised engineers building structures that could withstand earthquakes and hurricanes. They guided farmers growing crops in soil that had been considered barren. Most importantly, they served as teachers and counselors for a human species that was learning to think of itself as part of a larger galactic community. Children grew up knowing that there were friends among the stars, people who had faced the same challenges that humanity was now confronting, and who had found ways to overcome them. Jake found his role changing from ambassador to something like a spiritual guide for both species. Humans came to him seeking to understand the aliens' perspectives, while the Kethani relied on his wisdom about human nature and emotions. He had become a bridge between two very different ways of thinking about existence. As he stood on the deck of his boat one evening, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and red, Jake reflected on how much his life had changed. He was still a fisherman at heart, still drawn to the rhythm of the waves and the smell of salt air. But he was also something more now, a guardian of the relationship between Earth and its new partners among the stars. The object that had started it all sat quietly in its place on the deck, no longer glowing but still containing mysteries that scientists would probably spend decades trying to understand. It had served its purpose, bringing two civilizations together in friendship and mutual respect. Now it was simply a reminder of the day when humanity learned that it was not alone in the universe, and chose to embrace the friendship that was offered to them. 5 years had passed since the Kethani joined humanity in the digital networks of Earth, and the world had become a place that Jake sometimes barely recognized. The changes had been gradual but profound, touching every aspect of human civilization in ways both large and small. Cities that had once been choked with pollution now gleamed under clean skies, powered by energy systems that drew power from sources the Cathani had taught humans to access safely. Diseases that had once been death sentences were now minor inconveniences, treated with medicines that worked with the body's natural healing processes instead of fighting against them. Farms that had once struggled to feed their local communities now produced abundance that could be shared with the entire world. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in humanity itself. The presence of the Cathani had challenged humans to think beyond their traditional limitations and conflicts. Wars had not ended completely, but they had become rare and brief, usually resolved through negotiation guided by alien wisdom, rather than escalating into the devastating conflicts of the past. Jake had become something of a celebrity, though he still preferred the quiet of his boat to the attention of crowds. His small fishing village had grown into a thriving community that served as an unofficial embassy between humanity and the Cathani. Scientists, diplomats, and curious visitors from around the world came to meet the man who had first made contact with Earth's new partners. The Lucky Marie still sat in the same spot where it had been anchored since that first day, but it was now surrounded by research facilities and cultural centers that had grown up around it. The boat itself had been preserved exactly as it was when Jake pulled up his extraordinary catch, serving as a monument to the moment when everything changed. Dr. Cameron had established a university dedicated to studying the integration of human and Cathani knowledge. Students came from every nation to learn how to work with alien technology and wisdom. Jake often served as a guest lecturer, sharing his experiences and insights about building trust between different species. "The most important thing I learned," he would tell his audiences, "is that intelligence and kindness are not the same thing. The Cathani are incredibly intelligent, but what makes them special is that they chose to use that intelligence to help others, rather than to dominate them." The partnership had not been without its challenges. Some humans still struggled with the idea of sharing their world with alien consciousness, and there had been attempts by various groups to disrupt the computer networks where the Cathani lived. But these efforts had always failed, partly because the aliens had learned to protect themselves, but mostly because the vast majority of humanity had come to see the Cathani as friends and protectors. The aliens had also faced their own difficulties in adapting to human digital environments. The chaotic emotional nature of human communication had been overwhelming at first for beings who were accustomed to the ordered, logical patterns of their own species. They had learned to filter and process the constant flood of human information, finding ways to be helpful without being intrusive. One of the most unexpected developments had been the emergence of hybrid art forms that combined human creativity with Cathani technical perfection. Musicians collaborated with alien intelligence to create symphonies that incorporated sounds and harmonies that no human could have imagined alone. Artists worked with Cathani pattern recognition abilities to create visual experiences that seemed to speak directly to the viewers. Emotions. Children who had grown up with the Cathani as part of their daily lives were beginning to show remarkable abilities. They learned faster, solved problems more creatively, and showed an instinctive understanding of both human and alien ways of thinking. Some scientists speculated that humanity was evolving into something new, a species that could bridge the gap between purely biological and purely digital forms of consciousness. Jake often spoke with Cathani about these changes, seeking to understand what they meant for both species' futures. The alien had become more than just a contact or even a friend. Over the years, their conversations had developed into a deep, philosophical partnership that explored questions about existence, consciousness, and the nature of intelligence itself. "Do you think we made the right choice?" Jake asked during one of their evening conversations as he sat on the deck of his boat, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "There is no wrong choice when it is made with wisdom and kindness," Cathani replied through the boat's communication system. "Your species chose to trust us despite your fears, and we chose to share our knowledge despite our own uncertainties. Together we have created something neither of us could have achieved alone." The most ambitious project of the partnership was just beginning to take shape. Using Cathani technology, humanity was preparing to send its first expedition to the stars. Not just robotic probes, but actual human beings traveling to other solar systems to explore worlds that might harbor life of their own. Jake had been invited to join the expedition as humanity's official ambassador to any alien species they might encounter. The idea both thrilled and terrified him. He was past 60 now, an old fisherman who had never expected to travel farther from home than the fishing grounds off the Maine coast. But the thought of representing humanity among the stars was both an honor and a responsibility he could not refuse. The ship being built for the mission was unlike anything humans had ever constructed. It combined the best of human engineering with Kethani technology, creating a vessel that could travel faster than light while maintaining a living environment that would feel like home to its human crew. The Kethani consciousness would travel with them, serving as guides and advisors as they explored the unknown. As Jake prepared for this new adventure, he often returned to the object that had started it all. The alien probe sat quietly on his deck, no longer active but still serving as a reminder of the day when his simple life had become connected to the vast community of intelligence that existed among the stars. Pete Rodriguez, now the captain of his own fishing boat, often visited Jake to talk about the old days and the new possibilities that lay ahead. "Do you ever miss the simple life, Captain Jake? When all we had to worry about was the weather and the fish?" Jake smiled as he looked out at the ocean that had been his home for so many years. "I miss the simplicity sometimes, but I would not trade what we have gained for anything. We learned that we are not alone in the universe, and more importantly, we learned that we do not have to face our challenges alone." The sun was setting over the Atlantic, painting the sky in the same shades of gold and red that Jake had watched thousands of times before. But now he knew that the same sun was shining on worlds circling distant stars, warming oceans where other forms of consciousness might be taking their first tentative steps toward the stars. In a few months, Jake Morrison would leave Earth for the first time in his life, carrying with him the hopes and dreams of two species as they ventured together into the unknown. The fisherman who had caught more than he bargained for was about to become an explorer of infinities he had never imagined possible.